Professor Baddeley. You're 90 years old. I'm 31 years old. You've lived through a very epic period in human history. Such an honor sitting in front of you. Do you remember what the sentiment was about England leaving India?
In general, there was a feeling about the empire that we were helping out. So I can remember growing up as a child and thinking, oh, it would be a good thing to be a district officer.
Do you remember the World War happening?
Oh, absolutely.
What was it like?
We were actually...
Wow. What have you learned about stress over the years?
Avoid it.
Did you ever smoke marijuana?
I read about it and it had to be warmed up. So I warm it up and have it on toast.
Did you get high?
I was in an LSD experiment.
Really? Let's speak about this, sir. How does it feel seeing your bros pass away?
It can be very frustrating.
Who's been your closest friend?
My colleague Graham Hitch.
He's alive?
Yes, we're still working together.
You've been friends with the same guy for more than 50 years now.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. It's been a good decision, right, to get married?
Yes, and although my wife has memory problems, she'd like to take care of me. So she will try to do things that she used to be able to do and can't, and I do them. But that's fine. She's done them for me for many, many years. I like being able to do them for her.
Do you miss your mother?
No, I miss my father. He died at the age of 56. He would have loved to have seen me be successful. I tend to have tears when I talk about him.
It's very rare that we get to see such well-spoken and sharp 90-year-olds. You've done a lot of correct things in life to still have a positive relationship with life. You're the kind of person that younger people need to turn to. When I meet my friends at this stage of life, I'm 31 years old. In our early 30s, we often speak about the concept of aging and the concept of death. But to hear about these topics from someone who's actually seen life, who's lived through the Second World War, who's seen many fabulous decades of the human story, and who's from a whole other culture, a whole other country. Those are the kind of conversations that I find enriching. This was a very enriching conversation for me. In India, it's believed that if you talk to a 90-year-old about life, those 60 minutes that you spend speaking to that 90-year-old can be deeply valuable for the next 60 years of your life. And I hope that you gain value for the next 60 years of your life through today's conversation with Dr. Alan Baddeley. He's one of the most renowned British psychologists of all time. While we didn't dive into the depths of his work related to psychology and memory as a concept, we did dive deep into the human mind and heart. This was a very emotional conversation where we spoke about relationships, friendships, parenthood, family, and the kind of topics that matter at that stage in life. But I promise you, you'll gain a lot of career motivation from today's very special conversation with Dr. Alan. Please sit down, relax, and enjoy this episode. Professor Baddeley, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Such an honor sitting in front of you. You've given 50 years of your life, more than 50 years of your life, to one single subject.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed it.
Yeah? What would you call that one single subject?
Human memory.
Gotcha. You know, we live in times where mental health issues and thoughts about implicit memories, conversations related to people's childhoods affecting their adulthoods, these things have become way more common. But you've been dealing with aspects of these subjects since the 1970s?
Yes, we don't really have a detailed view of what's going on in our brains when we remember something. And a lot of it is automatic. But we have access to some of it, and this is what we think of as memories.
Gotcha.
And our memories do a very good job in sorting out what's important, adding what's normal to what we know, but allowing bits of it to be accessible when we want it. So memories are terrific, and if computers could do as well as this, they'd be even better than they are.
Gotcha. You know, there's so many other tangents I want to take on this conversation. So how about we join a couple of those topics?
Okay.
We'll talk about human memory from the perspective of your life.
Okay.
That's fine by you?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're about 90 years old?
I'm 90 years old, yes.
So you were born in 1934.
Yeah.
Do you remember the World War happening?
Oh, absolutely.
What was it like?
We were actually very sheltered from it. I grew up in Leeds, which is an industrial city, which was filled with pollution in those days. And so the Luftwaffe bombers could never find Leeds. My father was in the Home Guard, and he could see from Leeds the port of Hull burning some 60 or 70 miles away, but with one or two exceptions, we were not bombed. We were, of course, rationed, but it turned out that meant that we had a very good diet, but not too fancy.
When you say rationed, you mean the government allocated a certain amount of food to each family?
That's right. Rationing only stopped when I reached the age of 19.
Which is like 1953?
Yeah.
But why did rationing go on so long after the war?
Well, because lots of money had been spent on the war. America had done quite well out of it, but we hadn't. And yet the government at the time enacted really forward-looking acts such as making education open to everyone, creating the National Health Service, and various other things. Times were tough, but they didn't seem like tough if you were a child growing up.
I'm so fascinated by this aspect of this conversation, sir.
I'm happy to talk about it.
I mean, you've lived through a very epic period in human history. You've seen the war.
Yeah.
You've seen the Beatles. You've seen the hippie movement.
Yeah.
You've seen the breaking of the Berlin Wall.
Yes.
I have too much respect for you, and you're on my show, and I want to ensure you're very comfortable. So again, I'm just trying to have a very transparent conversation in order to build perspective.
Sure. Yeah.
You have been born and raised in England since your childhood. After World War II,
Yes.
England, like India was a colony of England, like
Yes.
back in the day.
Yeah.
I'd love to know what you guys used to hear about India when you were a child and you were a teenager. And did you hear about the Indian independence movement back then? Like, what was the narrative that you guys received?
Yes, we were very aware of the Indian independence movement. And effectively, the government was in a very bad way financially, but was elected to change society, which it did in a dramatic way. And doing that at the same time as trying to exercise any control over an India that didn't want to be controlled was very difficult. And we did learn about the terrible things that happened. Was aware of the fact that it seemed as though Nehru and, forgetting the name of the Pakistani,
Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
yeah, couldn't get together and agree anything. Felt we weren't in a position to impose anything, and the result was tragic.
The partition.
Yes.
But did news about the partition reach you guys in England?
I'm sure the slant on it was very different from what it was in India. But no, we did know about it.
Do you remember what the sentiment was about England leaving India? Great Britain leaving India back then?
I think it was a feeling that, well, if this is what they wish, then that's fine. I don't think there was a feeling that we should try and rule India.
Gotcha.
And I think in general there was a feeling about it, about the empire, that we were helping out.
How do you feel about these wars going on in the world right now?
Depressed.
Because you've seen World War II,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a certain kind of different lens that a 90-year-old person has on these wars, I feel.
Yeah. And I used to think that politicians would have more sense but I'm not now sure that if you can get people in high office that we have at the moment, it's rather depressing.
Do you remember World War II heating up?
I can remember air raids. I can remember the news being bad. I can remember getting up when the sirens and sheltering in the house. And the discussion as to whether you were safer in the cellar or in the staircase. But as a child, this was just exciting.
Really?
Because apart from a couple of occasions when the bombing did occur, they always passed over. But I remember my father being called out as a home guard to guard a bomb that had dropped until the disposal people came, and he's having to guard a German airman in the hospital. What he would have done if the airman had tried to escape, I don't know, because he was not a very large or aggressive man.
Do you remember the atom bombs and when they were dropped?
Yes.
That made it to the news back then?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
What was the sentiment back then?
Horror in a way, but also relief, and I can't remember in detail, but...
Like a horrific end to a brutal war.
Yeah.
Was there any regret about like the atom bomb?
Oh, there was a lot of discussion and regrets, and it was clearly a very difficult situation.
Living through a war, understanding that this is the reality of the world, seeing your country become poor through the course of a decade-long period, what did it do to your long-term perspective on life?
I think it makes me less concerned about short-term problems. It doesn't necessarily make me feel reassured about things like global warming and climate change, and the fact that countries' politicians have less capacity to control themselves, and multinational corporations have more influence.
Gotcha. The big question I have for you regarding your subject is about childhood, because it's something that my generation thinks about a lot. Your subject is about how human memory works.
Yes.
So, for most human beings,
Yeah.
do they all remember aspects of their childhood, or do people forget?
There are styles of recollection, and I think there are cultural differences. There are studies of how mothers talk to their children. And American mothers tend to be more likely to ask for memories of their children. Say, do you remember how we saw this? Or do you remember what we saw in the museum? Whereas I think in other cultures, some other cultures, that's much less likely. So I suspect that there is a style of questioning, and that will influence how much you remember, because it will refresh your memories.
Gotcha. Okay, so sir, I'd love for you to clear some concepts for me. Okay? The way that I think memory works is that I'm living my life, and since age 4, my eyes have seen certain situations, my ears have heard certain sentences, and all of that data is stored in my brain at some point, but not all of it is accessible. Aspects that I constantly go back to are accessible. Aspects that I practice are accessible. So there's a mass amount of data somewhere in my brain, out of which only a portion of it can be pulled out and remembered. And as you move forward in life, if you're not pulling out that data and or using that data, your brain will keep sending that data into that inaccessible part of your own mind. Is that a correct way of looking at memory?
I think it is. As a sort of general summary, yes. Now, when you remember something, it can depend on, are you just remembering it, or are you recognizing it, or do you have a clue that prompts it? So remembering and not remembering is not a simple threshold. It's an activity. It's, if you like, a way of reconstructing the past to allow you to retrieve some things, but not others.
Gotcha. I mean, as I'm hearing you talk, sir, I have a lot of tangential questions again
Yeah,
about life in general and not
Yeah.
just your subject.
yeah.
I mean, we don't necessarily just have to talk about memory. It can just be a
Sure,
human
no,
conversation.
right, yeah.
What does being 90 feel like?
Strange. I feel 90 when I walk, but I don't feel 90 when I talk. Pleased with that. Unless I have to remember things, detail.
You're saying that with age, you end up forgetting people's names, maybe?
Absolutely, yes. And you forget other things, details, but names particularly.
Yeah.
It can be very frustrating because particularly if you're telling a story and you're talking about someone and you can't specify them, then it stops. Or even worse, telling a joke and then suddenly forgetting the punchline.
No, I hear you.
It's also tempting at 90 to ramble on about things. Memories come back and you think, oh, that reminds me of this, that and the other. When you get old, you tell anecdotes all the time and you have to resist this.
Yeah. Pardon me for being this direct with you, okay? But
That's okay.
okay. Like, I'm having a lot of fun just getting to know you.
Yeah.
The question I have for you is honestly about aging because, like, as I'm speaking with you, I feel like you're really, really sharp for the age of 90.
Yeah.
I don't meet too many 80 somethings who are as sharp as you. Are you this sharp because you've been at it with your work?
First of all, I'm this sharp because I'm lucky.
It's genetic.
I have the right genes. My father died at 56. My mother died at 92, and she was pretty sharp. She worked as a housewife until my father died, and then worked in a shop. So she wasn't in a very rich intellectual environment. But in science, you build up knowledge, you build up skills, because you have skills that you can still pursue.
Fair. This conversation we were having about you being sharp at the age of 90, I'm sure you have a lot of friends who grew up with you
Yes.
and who may not be at your level of sharpness anymore. And don't mind me saying these things. And pardon me if I'm saying something wrong.
No, you're not. I've really lost contact with most of the people I grew up with.
Yeah.
At 90, I'm kind of lucky to still be here.
What do you think your mental age is?
I don't know.
Okay.
I had an IQ as a student. We tested each other as part of the course. I had an IQ of 140 apparently.
You have an IQ of 140?
I'm sure I don't now.
I mean, but I'm
had
not
at one
surprised considering your body of work.
Yeah. Yes, I seem to have I've been reasonably bright.
Yeah, quite clearly. And you had some kind of attention deficit disorders when you were a kid.
Yeah, I think that can go with creativity, I think. And I think one of the problems with the concept like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is that it's based on a clinical diagnosis of children who are having difficulty. And I think it's probably a combination of two things: the level of energy you have, and the other being your capacity to control it and use it profitably. And I think we really need a psychology of energy, a concept of energy.
I agree.
Which is missing. And if I was starting again, that's what I would look at.
Yeah. If you were starting today, you would try linking the energy quantity within someone's mind with the ability to create great things in the world.
No, I'd do something much simpler than that. We would need tools in order to measure it. And I would take something like COVID and long COVID, where there are a lot of people who have real energy problems, and I would work with them in order to try and measure it and see what things energy influences.
Gotcha.
I'd also want to talk to people who knew about the physiology, about the way in which the body creates energy.
Understood.
And I'd also be interested in energy in children and so forth. So I think that's a whole important area, and individual differences.
Right.
And as an individual lacking energy, noticing one time I was visiting colleagues doing research, and I got a food bug, and I was up all night, and my friend called and said, "You must be very bored." And I thought, no, I don't have the energy to be bored, and that you need to have energy to be bored even.
Yeah.
So I think it's an important, fascinating area that if I was starting again, that's what I'd look at. So anyone out there?
Can we talk a little bit about friendship?
Yes.
Who's been your closest friend in your whole life and why?
The friend I've been closest to for longest is my colleague Graham Hitch, who originally we met when I was teaching him as a master's student.
So you must have been in your late 20s?
Yeah.
He must have been in his mid or early 20s.
He was in his early... He was an undergraduate at Cambridge, in physics at Cambridge. I'd had 9 years at a unit where I didn't need to apply for money. And my boss, he said, you should put in a grant and ask for a research assistant and also a postdoc. And why not ask one of the people we've been teaching? And Graham and I supervised his his master's project. So I put his name down. I asked for more money than they were prepared to give. But fortunately, they cut out the research assistant and kept in the postdoc. And it was Graham arriving that caused the working memory model to be created at that time.
Why did the friendship sustain?
We get on very well together, but Graham gets on with everybody.
Oh, wow. So you've been friends with the same guy for more than 50 years now.
Yeah.
What's the role of friendship in a man's life as the man ages? I guess you end up developing friendships with the people you most enjoy working with.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a very generalized statement, but this is what I see with all the adults around me. That the people in their 50s and 60s, if they're doctors, a lot of their friends will be doctors. If they're professors, a lot of their friends will be professors.
Sure. Apart from anything else, you meet them from time to time at meetings. You have common friends to talk about, common gossip, if you like, from the field. So that makes a contact. I have had friends that were nothing at all to do with that were initially based on playing bar billiards at the pub.
Gotcha.
But which lasted. And,
they're the friends who give you a break from family life, which I think one needs a little bit.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yes, I'm thinking of going to the pub to play bar billiards, which was a break from family life when the kids were young.
Understood. Okay. We've been speaking for a bit now.
Yeah.
Are you all right to talk in this manner?
Yeah, sure.
You're having fun?
Yeah, I am. Yes.
Okay. Do you remember the 60s?
Yes, sure.
Fun times?
Yeah. I was a bit old for the 60s.
Like you were in your mid 20s,
Yeah.
late 20s in the 60s.
Yeah.
Do you remember the rise of the Beatles?
30s. Yes, I can remember. I've never actually seen them. But I remember when I first saw their name, as we were driving past this theatre, which said the Beatles, spelled in that way. And I thought, what a strange name. But they were, I was a previous generation. I was into folk music and jazz.
Wow. Louis Armstrong?
Yeah.
Gotcha. That kind of music.
That sort of.
Frank Sinatra?
No, that was, well, my cousins, my older cousins were into that.
Gotcha. Do you remember the hippie movement?
Oh, absolutely.
Was it a big thing in England?
Yeah, I mean, when I say a big thing, you knew about it, and they knew people who were hippies, and you even heard about people who'd turned a bit hippie.
But what that meant taking drugs? Like, what did it mean?
Oh, it meant that they dressed in a particular way.
Okay.
They maybe smoked marijuana. They had a particular approach to life. And they grew their hair long.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Did you ever smoke marijuana?
A couple of times.
And how did you feel about it?
It was quite pleasant. It was at a leavers party for students in Cambridge, and one of them passed me a spliff, and I tried it.
This must have been in the 50s?
No, it was later than that.
60s?
Yeah. Could even have been the 70s. No, I was worried about it because it was illegal. And in fact, I was given an envelope when visiting friends in San Francisco, and opened it up on the plane and found there was a book about marijuana and some grass in there. And I was rather alarmed at this. Would I be picked up for drugs? And I was staying in the house of an academic friend who was on sabbatical and didn't know what to do with this. So I hid it for a while, and then eventually, for the summer, I went to Los Angeles, where I was on my own working on a diving project. And I thought, well, I should give this a try. And I read about it, and I saw that it had to be warmed up.
It was what, like grass?
It's like grass, if you like.
Gotcha.
So I thought, well, I don't know. I don't smoke. And if I go and buy cigarette papers, they'll know. So I warm it up and have it on toast with marmalade.
So you mixed it in marmalade and had it?
Yeah.
Wow. Did you get high?
No, not very.
Okay. Did a lot of people smoke marijuana back then?
More later. I'm sure more now.
Yeah, a lot more now. People mainly drank for fun?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Some people like smoking.
Cigarettes?
Yeah. Or even pipes in those days.
Gotcha. Was there other experimental drugs that were being used? LSD?
Yeah, it was being used experimentally. In fact, I was in an LSD experiment.
Really? Let's speak about this, sir.
I had various jobs until eventually, so I worked as a hospital porter and as a totally untrained teacher, and then went to a research centre in Bristol, did work on basically EEG and neurology.
This must have been what, 60s again?
58.
Wow.
And so it's a very interesting experience. I'd read about Aldous Huxley and mescaline and so forth, and so I thought I should have hallucinations.
Did you?
Well, I kept thinking, well, that's a very vivid visual image, but is it a hallucination? Is there something wrong with me that I'm not hallucinating? And I thought, oh, well, maybe I should just accept it. And then afterwards I went to see the St. Louis Blues and the films, and that was good, and listened to Beethoven's Pathétique and wept.
Wow.
And it was a great experience, yeah. But I didn't feel I needed to have further experiences, perhaps partly because it wouldn't have been very easy to get, and partly because the report was that it doesn't actually improve over successive experiences, and I could see it wouldn't. It was just a wonderful one-off experience that I now remember.
You did it only once?
Only once.
Okay. And they studied your brain waves and all that. They tried understanding the brain's response to LSD.
Yeah. Whether it ever got published, I rather doubt.
Why do you think it never kind of got legalized, or why do you think the war on drugs happened in the first place?
Well, I think a lot of drugs had very negative effects on people.
Like heroin.
Heroin, certainly, and often there would be a sort of downwards spiral. And I don't think having LSD ad lib would actually do you much good.
Right.
And I think our brains are sort of fairly finely balanced, and that messing around with that is risky.
Right. Professor Allen,
Yeah.
having fun in the conversation?
Yeah,
I have a lot of tangential questions again.
yeah.
People in your age group who aged along with you, but who didn't have the best mental health as they aged, and I'm sure there's so many of them. They say that loneliness is the biggest epidemic in the world right now.
Yes.
Do you think that's always been the case? Like over the last 50 to 60 years, was loneliness always a thing and it's just being spoken about more? Or do you think that loneliness has actually increased in the world?
I suspect loneliness has always been a problem, but it's a different problem now because to what extent does having an electronic or mobile phone contact with someone alleviate loneliness? And to what extent are you perhaps more lonely because you're not actually seeing them? And I think there are all these complicating factors. So I think when I was growing up, families would live close to each other. So I had probably 5 or 6 aunts and uncles who also had cousins. And every Christmas there would be a Christmas party, an evening party at each person's every weekend.
Right. What have you learned about stress over the years?
Avoid it. Well, no, that's not true, because I used to do diving and play rugby, and I suppose there's good stress and bad stress. So if it's good, it's excitement. If not, it's anxiety. And maybe part of the secret is to turn the anxiety into excitement or avoid it.
So what happens in one's brain during the 80s? And by brain, I actually mean mind. The question is, do you become more reflective in your 80s? Do you think more about concepts like death, concepts like leaving? What happens?
Yes, I'm sure you think more about death than when you're younger. And you do look back because there's not so much to look forward to. Whereas I've tended to be a person who lived a bit in the future. I was looking forward to things. And I still like to do that. But realistically, I have a research program it would be nice to pursue that's going to take 20 years. I'm not the person to do that. But I can think over maybe 1 or 2 years and keep my fingers crossed, and maybe it'll extend to 3 or 4.
Has love been a big part of your fuel?
I think not in a sort of sense of romantic love.
Really? But how long have you been married?
60 years.
60 years.
60.
And how has marriage evolved?
It's evolved pretty well. Have different interests initially, and they've come together. And we've got to know each other, and in some ways it's become easier. Life gets less complicated.
How do you know that your wife was the one before you got married?
Well, I'd had a number of girlfriends.
Hey.
At the time in Cambridge, it was normal to be going out with more than one girl at the same time.
Fair.
Eventually, it seemed like time to get married.
How old were you when you got married?
30.
But you knew that this girl is the one you wanted to marry.
I thought that this was the girl I wanted to marry. And likewise, she thought that I was the guy she wanted to marry.
Okay, so it was kind of a higher probability that
Yes.
this is what will last.
Yes. Other girlfriends, after a while, I would find that we were slightly rubbing each other the wrong way, and it was clear that time to move on. So it was a pragmatic approach to marriage.
I think that's the way to go. You need to be a little pragmatic, a little practical. You need to see where you're finding peace.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So did you find peace with your wife before you got married to her?
Not differential peace. I had earlier girlfriends where people said they thought we were married because we seemed to relax together. So, no, I don't know that there was a difference in level of peace.
Okay.
It's not something that occurred to me.
Timing must have been a factor as well.
Yes, yes.
That you were like, oh, I'm closing in on 30. I think it's time to get married. This one seems like it'll last.
Yeah, and it has.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, I'm sure you went through some rocky patches. Every relationship goes through rocky patches in the long term. How do you come out of those?
I don't know. In different ways. I think we had in fact a rocky patch before the wedding.
Really?
In which I suddenly became concerned that this whole apparatus was bearing down on us and stopped.
Of marriage?
Yes.
I understand what you're saying.
And Hillary convinced me otherwise, and she was right. I'm a rather pragmatic character, as you probably realise.
Understood.
And, but it's worked.
There's a lot of men all over the world who are going through something very similar.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like guys get commitment issues and then the girl convinces the guy. This is a very common thing that happens all over the world.
Yeah.
But it's been a good decision, right, to get married?
It has, yes.
Why has it been a good decision?
A good relationship that's continued. It hasn't been like other relationships where the girl and I were fine, but it didn't really work. And here it's continued to work. And we're different. We accept our differences. But it has worked.
Gotcha. Was it one of the high points in your life having kids?
Yes, yeah.
That 20-year period where your child is a child, up till the age of 20 roughly. That's what I'm scared of right now. That I think it's going to be too much of a responsibility.
I've always believed that it was up to you to do your best for the child, but ultimately they were individuals and they took the decision. And you would protect them, you would help them, but you couldn't live their life for them. And if they chose to do bad things, then you couldn't stop them, but you could bring them up in a way that you hope they wouldn't. And that seems to have worked. I've got 3 boys who are very, very different, but they're all good people. They get on with each other and they're fun.
And I feel like your family is the big support and the big anchor in your existence.
It is, yes.
What advice do you have for young men today? Or just me?
You. I suspect the world is so different that advice from me isn't necessarily useful, but do something you enjoy. And if you do it well, keep doing it. If you don't, try and find something you do enjoy. And that being successful is something that is not of primary importance. I certainly didn't start out wanting to be famous. And I suspect I am now since you've come and interviewed me. But I thought I could have a job that allowed me to do something I was good at and keep doing it. And if I can do it a bit better, and if I maybe can do it better than some other people, then fine, I'll keep doing it. But that if there are lots of things I'm no good at, technical things I'm no good at. Maths I gave up at 16. Athletically, I played rugby rather badly for a lowly team. But it was something different from what I was doing. It kept me fit. Running a unit of about 100 people, it was full of people who had skills that I didn't have, but I had the sort of skills that fitted me for that job.
So find something you enjoy, and if you turn out to be better than the average person doing that job, stick to it and try improving.
Yeah.
That's your advice.
That's my advice.
Okay. And any relationship advice? Like your marriage is sustained.
Yes.
For 60 years.
You have to have a sense of humour, a common sense of humour.
A common sense of humour.
Yes, between you, yes, which we do have. And you have to accept that there are going to be ups and downs, and that sometimes one of you will be a bit down and the other one not. And there has to be give and take. Basically, you have to care for each other, not be selfish.
Gotcha. What do you think the role of love is in a human life?
I don't know what love is. And I can remember as a child, as a teenager, thinking, well, what does it mean to love my mother? And the movies, sort of romantic love and so forth, is clearly something very different.
Do you miss your mother?
No. I miss my father in a funny sense, in that he died at the age of 56, and he would have loved to have seen me be successful. And I tend to have tears when I talk about him. And I was very close. And I feel sad that he missed out probably the better part of his life, because he had a hard life, but a very good one.
I'm sure he's still with you and he's proud of you.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Do you think that this intention to, go for it in your career came from your father's legacy as well?
I think my father believed in the importance of education and understanding the world and interacting with it decently. He didn't want me to go into business, which he'd had not very good experience of. And so I think would have been pleased that I had adapted to an academic life.
If you get a chance to say something to him now, what would you tell him?
I'd say that I owed a lot to him, and that I regret that we didn't have longer together. We did talk, in fact. He had a period of depression, and he and I used to go out and walk together, and I got to know him quite well then. And in fact, when he died while I was on a skiing holiday in my final year at university in Switzerland. And a telegraph message came through to say he died. But my mother said he'd not to come back because for the funeral, and that he wouldn't want me to do that. And I can remember going on a walk on my own and talking to him and discussing it with him, and in fact deciding what to do. And I went to a party that night, but it didn't mean I didn't care.
And I really appreciate you opening up about this on the show. Are you happy with life at this stage?
Yes, yeah. I'm very happy that I've got to this stage, and I'm still enjoying it, and I'm still doing things. And although my wife has memory problems, she's still herself, and we still get on.
Yeah. My grandparents from my mum's side, my mum's parents, my grandmother, in India we call her Nani. So my Nani's also developed some memory problems.
Yeah.
And my Nana is as sharp as you.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like I'm talking to my own granddad here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm seeing that my Nani having memory problems is kind of affecting my Nana on some level, but he's still taking care of her.
Yeah.
Out of love and romance. I think that that's kind of what you're going through as well on some level.
Yes, I mean, our link is more companionship, because discussing things we can within a limited extent, but she has word-finding problems, but we still have a contact and almost non-speaking, but we look after each other.
Perhaps this is the true meaning of love.
I think it probably is, yes. Yeah.
That movies don't tell us about.
No, I think that's right.
Because movies are usually about people in their 20s or 30s.
Yeah.
No one speaks about love in their 80s or 90s.
They're about romantic love, which is clearly important, but it's different.
Your role at this point is to take care of her.
Yes, yeah.
And her role is still all about taking care of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you think she takes care of you at this stage?
Basically just maintaining a companionship and a friendship. And she'd like to take care of me, but she's not able. So she'll try to do things that she used to be able to do and can't, and I do them. But that's fine. She's done them for me for many, many years. I like being able to do them for her.
And you recognize her intention of taking care of you.
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
That's what matters the most.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't mind me probing this way, right?
No.
I mean, one of my goals with this show is to understand life better.
Mm-hmm.
And probably in the last 9 years of creating videos, this is one of the most wholesome conversations I've had.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Because you're a very well-spoken person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean, I know how pragmatic you are, and that's come out through the show.
Yeah.
But sometimes I feel that younger people need pragmatic advice like this.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's too much mollycoddled advice out there on the internet already.
Sure. No, I'm very, very happy to have people listen to this. And
Yeah.
basically, it's how I feel. And
Yeah.
thank you for asking.
No, sir. I mean, it's very rare that we get to see such well-spoken and sharp 90-year-olds. So you've done a lot of correct things in life to reach this stage and still be strong, still be loving, still have a positive relationship with life, have a positive relationship with your family. You're the kind of person that younger people need to turn to.
Yeah. I think one of the things that spurs me on is the fact that if I can do this, then it encourages other people. And I can remember being on a committee with the chap who first demonstrated that smoking causes cancer. And he was probably in his late 80s. But he was just sharp as a pin, but didn't show off his knowledge. But it was there. And the fact that he was still there and doing an important, useful job encouraged me to think, well, the fact that I'm this age doesn't necessarily mean I've got to behave as if I assume I'm that age. If I can do it, I'll keep on doing it. And it's a little bit like there's this sort of cartoon of Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, where Roadrunner would run and Wile E. Coyote would run off a cliff and he'd keep running until he looked down.
And then he falls.
So I feel I'm running like Wile E. Coyote and it doesn't do to look down too much. And if it works, it works.
You're just sprinting at it with life.
Keep going.
No, it's beautiful, sir.
Yeah.
This is one of those conversations that's left me feeling a lot stronger. And I probably needed that at age 31. So all I want to say is I respect you tremendously. I'm very, very grateful for your time, sir. And I know that we've recorded this podcast and done a favor to a lot of people out there who needed a lot of...
Okay. Well, I'm delighted if it's helpful.
Yeah. This was not what we intended on doing initially. I thought we'll make it about your body of work.
Yeah.
But I think this is even more evergreen.
Okay. Fine.
Yeah, you had fun today?
It was more enjoyable than my body of work.
No, I'm glad, sir. Thank you. Lots of respect, lots of love.
Okay.
I wish you even more peace, even more light, and even more satisfaction as you move forward in life. Thank you so much.
And you too.
Thank you, sir. That was the conversation for today, ladies and gentlemen. Please let us know about your favorite sections from today's episode, because there's a few conversations that I have through the course of my own journey that stay with me, that shape my perception of the world. And these are the kind of podcasts I look forward to the most. It's beyond the realms of simple self-improvement or spiritual conversation as well. This is an experimental episode for us, so I'd love to know what you guys thought of our experiment. In my eyes, there was a lot of wisdom packed into this episode. I'd love to hear from you guys about your favorite sections from this podcast. Tell us in the comment section down below. Dr. Alan Baddeley is a legend from the world of British psychology, and I'm honestly very, very honored that he spent time with us and shared his wisdom that he's gained over the course of the 90 years of his life on TRS.